Everyone. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Mimi Zach here at Avalara, and welcome to our webinar, Simplify Harmonized System Codes to Support Global Trade. Before we dive in, I'm just going to provide you guys with a couple of reminders. So a disclaimer that while we hope you find the discussion helpful, Avalara cannot provide legal tax advice. Everything we discuss today is for educational purposes only, but we will answer your questions as best as we can. I'm going to leave the safe harbor statement up while I go through another couple list of reminders. So we are recording today's webinar, so if you want to listen to it again or even share it with a colleague, keep an eye on your email inboxes for the link to the recording. We'll send it out in the next 24 hours. Next, let's look at the webinar console and how you can interact with us with it. So there's a Q&A box. You use the Q&A box on the left-hand side of your screen, right underneath the video feed, to submit your questions for myself or for our speakers. We will be responding to questions individually as we're able through the Q&A box, and have some extra time to set aside at the end of the presentation for live Q&A as well. So if you're able to, please stick around for that. There's also a community chat on the console that you can use to interact or network with your fellow webinar attendees and network with other tax professionals like yourself. If you'd like to check that out, click the icon that looks like a text message bubble at the bottom of your screen, and that will pop it up. You can also click on that again to minimize the video if it's to minimize that window if it's too distracting for you. We also have some related resources and links available on the console if you're interested in learning more about the topics we're discussing today. All of those links will open up in a new tab and be waiting for you when the webinar is over. That is also where you can download your copy of today's slide deck if you'd like to save them for later reference, or just get a sneak peek of the topics we're covering today. We do have some additional links in the slides themselves, so I would recommend downloading them and saving them for later reference if you're interested. We've also added the ability in the console for you to add reactions. If you want to let us know what you're thinking, you'll notice the smiley face icon at the bottom of the console. Once you click on that, you'll see some of the available reactions. For those looking to receive CPE credit today, please note that we will ask that you'll need to respond to 3 out of our 4 poll questions. The poll question will pop up on your screen for a limited amount of time, so please make sure that you're ready to answer when the question appears. You must also attend today's session for at least 50 minutes. Once you've met the CPE requirements, your certificate will be available to download in the Earn Certification box on your screen. Click the icon to access. Your certificate will also be available in the post-event email, so don't worry if you forget to download it today. All right, that's enough chit chat from me. Let's meet your presenters for today. Today, we are first joined by Patrick Frith. He's a Senior Director of Growth for Cross-Border here at Avalara. Patrick, will you give us a moment to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mimi. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. So Patrick Frith, I've been with Avalara for 6 years now, and my responsibility, my primary responsibility is helping our customers solve their cross-border headaches, whether it's HS code related, whether it's duty and tax calculations, restrictions or prohibitions. I support the individuals within our organization, many of the account executives that you work with, in order to create solutions which help you around your cross-border problems. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. And now let's throw it over to Brian. Brian Kelly joins us today. He is a cross-border sales specialist. Brian, will you take a moment to introduce yourself?
You got it. Thanks, Mimi. And Patrick and I have similar roles. I've spent 4 years with Avalara, spent 12 plus years, maybe 15. I forget what the number is at this point, but a lot of time with international e-commerce, customers, logistics, supply chain, just understanding that global perspective. And Patrick and I support the US and the European sales team when it comes to cross-border transactions, and a lot of what we're going to talk about today on diving deep into what a harmonized code is and how we can help.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you.
All right, let's take a quick look at what the agenda is going to be today. We'll first start off with HS Codes 101. What are they? What do they do? We'll look at the trends in the space that are kind of impacting or not impacting HS codes. A couple of business challenges that you and your company might be going up against as it relates to cross-border and HS codes. And then we'll preview an automated solution for dealing with them. Followed lastly, like I said, by a Q&A. But before we dive in, we have a quick poll question. So everybody get your mouses at the ready. This is the first of 4 CPE poll questions that we'll be asking today. I'll give you a couple of moments to respond, but where does your company sell? United States, Canada, Mexico, England, European Union, or other? You can select several. Just give you a couple moments here. Okay. Great. A lot in the US. We kind of got a good mix. US and Canada and Mexico are pretty big.
Wow.
Okay. Over to you, Brian.
You got it. Thanks, Mimi. And that looks like a pretty good mix. So we're going to get into being able to support all of those destination countries, what they mean, how some of the rules change, how some of the identification codes change as well. But what we're going to do is let's dive into first, what is an HS code? So I saw a big percentage in there that we ship and handle US tax compliance and so forth. What we're going to focus on today is, one, what's the difference between a tax code and a harmonized code or an HS code? And what's the importance around that HS classification code specific to the destination countries that I saw on that survey? So look at this screen here and look at that actual 10-digit code. That's specific for multiple reasons. So when you look at moving physical goods cross-border, this code is almost like the passport. As we move across borders, we need a passport to show customs clearance. As physical goods cross-border, they need a harmonized code or an HS code to cross a border. And what's that made of? So there's a certain portion of that code that's made up of what they call the chapter, the heading, the subheading, and all of these portions of this matter. And why does it matter? So first off, that first 6-digit code is universal. Universal meaning we can take that 6-digit code, customs clearance can identify that code, but then what is that additional 4 digits at the end? That's specific to the import country, and we're going to show you why it's important to have that fully qualified harmonized code or HS code when moving physical goods cross-border. So I've spent, like I mentioned, 12 or 15 years, and I forget at this point, but we have customers that dove deep head first into, we have rates from our carrier, we're going to start shipping our product globally without understanding what a harmonized code is or applying this. And I'm going to show you why it's important to do this pre-work, even on something as simple as a sandal. So this sandal, as I mentioned, there's a 6-digit code that tells customs clearance. This is a rubber sole, leather top, men's slipper made in China. All of those details are in that initial 6-digit universal code, which matter. Now, when you say, okay, we're going to take that rubber sole, leather top, men's slipper made in China to Australia, Australia is going to add their 4-digit extension. And I'll show you why that's important. The US has its own additional 4-digit extension, Japan, and so forth. You have the ability to do this to 190 countries, and here's why it matters. When we talk about a harmonized code, we talk about harmonized codes for two main reasons. One, I already mentioned, customs clearance. Two, we talk about that tariff or that duty associated with moving a product from one country to another. And what is that tariff agreement between two countries? And what's that percentage that needs to be applied on top of the tax? So again, I mentioned the tax code. That'll handle the VAT, GST for destination countries. The harmonized code is going to handle the duty or the tariff, moving that physical good into a country. So this is where that extension ultimately drives that accuracy with what that duty percentage should be based on the import country. Let me take you down another example. So let's take another product, and we're going to take this specific to Canada. So again, that 6-digit universal code outlines country of origin, outlines material, believe it or not, outlines gender. All of those things matter. But why does Canada have 4 separate 4-digit extensions? It's because the industry that that product is for, or that gender that that product is specific for, which ultimately drives another variation to what that duty or tariff should be when you move that product into that destination country. So think about a country where we're willing to put a 0% tariff on any medical materials, any medical devices, because our country needs that. So they give a more favorable tariff. That's why we want to make sure you have not only that 6-digit identifier, but ultimately that 4-digit extension outlining what industry is that product manufactured for. So all of those things matter. And I'll tell you another reason why they matter. When you look at these codes, there are certain products when you move, and this is a good one, where you cannot and you should not be shipping product similar to what you see on the screen into the UAE or into Jordan, but you are allowed to move this product into Canada. This could be as simple as moving bubble gum into Singapore or moving ballpoint pens into Malaysia. You want to identify where these restrictions may be, and believe it or not, they're restricted into those countries, and not ship them, because once they move into that country, customs is going to flag it, it gets delayed, and that product will sit until you pay to get that product reshipped back into your country. So know before you go, understand your products. And I'm going to get into a few more slides later on where you do not want to rely on third parties that are not looking at your product specific descriptions, because that's where the delays happen, that's where those inflated costs happen, and that's where the errors happen. So understand what your product is through a 6-digit code, and then understand where you plan on shipping your product to that additional 4-digit extension built onto that fully qualified harmonized code. And you'll know a lot about your product and what the costs are before you even start shipping. Now, there's a lot on this screen. How much information do I need to outline what my product is? How do I go to someone and say, like a third party or an Avalara, and say, how do I get my accurate 10-digit descriptions? And there's the key, the word accuracy. The more detailed information you could provide, the more accurate of a harmonized code you will get, and a more accurate duty or tariff rate you should anticipate. So know before you go is not only for customs clearance purposes, but it's also for calculation purposes. So look at some of these details that our customers provide us to ultimately get to that specific 10-digit code. And I'm going to pull a few of them out of here. How is the product made? Knitted or crocheted? What is the material of that product? Believe it or not, is it new or is it used? Could ultimately change that code. And you see the bottom one, gender matters. There's a lot of baby products that are allowed to go into certain countries at zero tariff. So outlining what that product is made for based on gender is ultimately important as well. So the more information you can give, the better the result you will get if you're relying on a company like Avalara to look at those products and understand that accurate 10-digit code. Now, I mentioned the word accuracy a few times. And accuracy, it's not only about customs clearance, but it's a trickle-down effect. So you're going to have inaccurate customs paperwork, which ultimately things get held at customs if you're not identifying, and customs looks at that product and says, we think it's this, and your 10-digit code isn't specifically describing your product accurately. That will sit in customs and be delayed until you have to go back and struggle with, how do I need to clearly identify it with the updated code? They're pretty much going to inflate that value, or someone's going to give you a surcharge when they are reactive to trying to correct that. So you're going to have inflated duties at that point as well, whether you get billed from your carrier or it moves to the customer. Those inaccuracies inflate that duty value. So the key point here being, whether you're doing that proactive approach, which you should, it's going to come back to either you as an inflated value or go to your customer as an inflated value, depending on how you ship. But that's where inaccuracies take place and those inflated duties would take place. And I mentioned carriers earlier, and I mentioned the 12 and 15 years of experience. So I did spend some time with one of the main carriers in the cross-border division, and they're picking up millions of boxes a day. And they're not going to stop their production to look at what, if you have the correct HS code on your product. They're going to move it overseas. Customs will then flag it. And that's where your additional brokerage fees kick in. That's where the delays kick in. So don't assume carriers will do this as an ongoing service. You need to be proactive and tell them through the commercial documentation that I've done my pre-work. Now you can ship this overseas because they're going to do it regardless. And that'll help clear through customs, avoid some delays, avoid some additional expenses. You need to manage these types of processes, a proactive approach.
I'd just add, if you don't mind, before the polling question, yeah. You know, similar to you, I worked at a carrier and integrator, and you know, the reality is tens of thousands of parcels arriving on a flight to a destination gateway, and they don't stop every parcel, open it up, make sure the HS code is correct. They go purely off what's on the airway bill, which is a product description, and if a HS code is partial or it's absent, then they will enter a HS code. And you know, with a very brief description, there's only so much information available for them to give a HS code. So typically, it'll default to the highest HS code in that duty bracket, which makes the shipment, of course, then compliant because you're paying the maximum duties, but it's not necessarily correct. And it pays to make sure that HS code is correct before the shipment is dispatched. So you're paying the correct duty amount, because as Brian pointed out earlier on, the HS code is linked directly to the duty tariff. So you're not paying a penny or a cent more or a penny or a cent less. You're paying the correct amount with a HS code which you have assigned to that particular product.
And you mentioned something about a description too, Patrick, which I'll add to. The days of saying this is a T-shirt, these countries are now becoming more and more strict with those vague descriptions, and they're putting rules and laws in place to say we now are looking for that harmonized code and not just that vague description. We need to understand, is it allowed in our country? And if it is, what's the duty or tariff associated with it? I'll start.
Absolutely.
The poll question. Is this where Mimi kicks in?
Yep, I'm back. All right, let's do a quick poll question before we continue on. All right, a bit of a quiz here. Select the two important tasks a harmonized system HS code performs. A, making other countries happy. B, accurate tariff and duty rates. C, custom clearance. Or D, influence carrier rates. You can select more than one. Give you all a couple of minutes. Okay. Perfect. Let's see how they did.
They were paying attention, it looks like, Mimi. I tried to trick them with the top one, making other countries happy, but they didn't fall for it.
Not many people pleasers in the room today. All right. Over to you, Patrick.
So thanks very much. So Brian, you gave us a great introduction into what HS codes are, what they mean, why they're important, the impact that they have, and consequences of not having correct or inaccurate or absent HS codes. So I just want to take you through a few trends here. And, you know, Brian and I and our colleagues, it's our job to keep our ears close to the ground and to see what trends we're seeing around the world, not just in the US, not just in Europe, you know, because our customers, they ship all over the world. So we need to know what's going on in Oceania. We need to go Asia. We need to know what's going on in the Middle East. So we do that. That's our job. And in doing so, we pick up trends. Okay. And I wanted to, before I go through the trends, I just wanted to remind everybody, I suppose, why selling internationally is actually worth the effort. It's a question there. But it is actually worth it, and there's 6 trillion reasons, you know, why you should be considering selling internationally if you're not already, and that's because that's going to be the size in US dollars of the global online sales in 2025. And so we survey our customers very often, again to get trends, and we know that currently 86% of our customers are selling cross-border. Which means one or more countries outside of their domestic market. And if they're not already, then 92% are planning on selling cross-border in the next 12 months. And one trend I think we have seen is, you know, in the last 18 months or so, are companies who, you know, we've all felt sort of the economic strains, I suppose, in the last couple of years. As businesses, as markets have tightened up a little bit, spending has tightened up in the last couple of years. So what doesn't go away, as you know, being you know leaders within your own business, in your own businesses, is the top line revenue targets of your companies don't change, right? So you have economic challenges within your markets, but that top line number of the organization you've still got to chase. So what do? If you've saturated your local or your regional market, you've got a good product. The only way you can go is overseas. You've got to go into different markets. So that's why we're seeing this surge of organizations who are going international. And if they're not already going international, they are certainly thinking about doing it in the next 12 months because it opens up more of a market for you and helps you achieve that top line revenue sales number. So a few more trends that we've seen. Just going to go through these one by one. So the first one is governments. 220 governments on the planet. So plenty of activity going on. And what we're seeing is two things. We're seeing, and I'll talk about these individually, the de minimis value, the thresholds, the de minimis thresholds. For those of you who aren't familiar with what de minimis is the line which is set, the dollar amount or the local currency amount set by a country, where anything below that line is duty-free when it's imported into that country. Anything above that line incurs duty. So here in the US, it's a very high line. It's the de minimis value here is $800. So if you're sitting in the UK and you're selling your products to the US and the product value is $1,000 US dollars, it will attract duty as soon as it arrives into the US. It's above 800. If it is below 800, then it will enter into the US. Of course, it has to go through a clearance process, but it will enter into the US without duty. Very high, $800. Australia is 1,000 Australian dollars. That's another high de minimis value. But everywhere else in the world is significantly lower than that. Canada is only 40 Canadian dollars, for instance. So what we're seeing is governments reevaluating this line, this de minimis threshold. And we had, I suppose, I remember when I was with an express integrator 15, 20 years ago, we saw de minimis values raising. So here in the US, we went up, if you remember, about 10 years ago, we went from the 250 to 800. And we saw those de minimis values as countries attracted more shipments, encouraged more imports, we saw de minimis rising. However, that's changed. And what we're seeing now is these levels dropping down. So Europe recently, in the last couple of years, dropped down. Canada, as I just mentioned, that dropped down to where it is today, 40 on courier shipments going into Canada. And in fact, here in the US, there are a couple of bills passing through the legal system which do propose a reduction in de minimis thresholds. When they will go through, if they will ever go through, is an unknown, of course. But the reality is, and a trend we're seeing, is that countries around the world are dropping those de minimis values. So what does that mean as an exporter or an importer? It means that you will see more duty being attracted to imports and exports around the world because those levels are dropping down and they fall within the threshold of attracting duty. So that's one thing we're seeing. Duty rates. So we're seeing this change more frequently than we are seeing de minimis thresholds change. De minimis thresholds less frequent, duty rate changes more frequent. And you can imagine 220 countries, millions of different products going in and out of those countries, and each of them have a duty rate. So there's more permutations in terms of duty. And we're seeing duty rates being evaluated more closely by governments. So thankfully, we have an excellent 250 strong content engineering team whose responsibility it is to see when these duty changes occur. Typically, governments give us a fair bit of announcement as to when a duty rate is going to change. They release a customs bulletin, which will say, oranges into South Africa, the duty is going to change from 5% to 7.5%, and there's a few months' notice. It's our responsibility to pick up these custom bulletins as they're released around the world, day by day, and to prepare our systems so that the duty percentages in our systems are accurate on the day that that change takes place. So we see that happen on a very frequent basis. There's a number of duty changes that take place every week around the world for certain products, and it's our responsibility to our customers to make sure that those duty rates are reflected accurately. And it's within a government's right to change duty rates. They have tariffs. It's a big conversation point here in the US. It's the right of a country to change those tariffs, those duty rates, to control the flow of products into a country, to protect the domestic market. however they may want to use tariffs to support their own country. So we're seeing an increased activity in duty rate changes. Next, we have the wider organization of the World's Customs Organization, the WCO, and their increasing strategic view on HS codes. So in 2022, which is 2 years ago, we had a very big overhaul of HS codes around the world. Remember what Brian said, those first 6 digits, they are universal. So every product shares the same first 6 digits wherever it is in the world, whichever country it's going from, whichever country it's going into, those first 6 digits. And those are the ones which are reviewed. So we've got, in the world that we live in, we've got a lot of product evolution. We've got lots of products, technologies particularly, that are being created that need a HS code. So the WCO examines this, and they look at all these new products. I remember the classic being Fitbits. Those of you who remember Fitbits, the watch that you used to wear for fitness. A lot of confusion when they first arrived on the scene. Is it a medical device? Is it a fashion accessory? Is it a watch? And you had, and I was working for an integrator at the time, so you had a lot of inconsistency of how these things were being classified. And of course, medical devices have a different duty rate to fashion accessories, which have a different duty rate to watches. So we had lots of different duties being applied to a product, and we didn't know at that time, we didn't know where it actually sat in the HS codes. So the WCO take on that responsibility and they classify them appropriately, and then all countries adopt that. And of course, products go away. So we have to sunset products, and the HS codes associated with those products, they have to be removed, taken out of the system. One thing that we see all the time, and Brian and I, we see this all the time. We see legacy HS codes, which have been used on a product by a company for the last 15 years, residing in some Excel spreadsheet somewhere in the office, continues to be used after the WCO have sunset it. So you're using a HS code which doesn't mean anything anymore because it's been sunset. And of course, when you export that product, you're using a HS code that nobody uses anymore. That's not recognized. And what happens? Well, then it gets exactly what Brian said. It gets held up. They said, "What's this? Paperwork inspection required." We don't know what it is, and the delays and the costs start incurring. And we can expect to see the trend here is we can expect to see more products obviously being produced, more codes being sunset. So it's vitally important that we all stay on top of the current and relevant HS codes. Next trend, the increased use of AI and machine learning. So, these are phrases we're very familiar with. We hear them every day now. And the reality is that we're seeing more and more governments adopting artificial intelligence and machine learning to support the activity of customs clearance. So I'll give you an example. Earlier this year, in February, the UK adopted and rolled out the use of artificial intelligence for examining customs entries of products entering into the UK, which were in the category of animal products. So pet foods, steaks, vegetables, fruits, this, that, and the other, anything that came in into the UK, those descriptions were being analyzed by artificial intelligence and were being cross-referenced with data that they had in their systems for HS codes. So the use of AI is upon us. It's as we all know, it's a train and it's coming into the station. Whether we like it or not, it's going to arrive. And so be mindful that AI is going to be used by governments, of course, and the best way to use it, in my opinion, in the clearance process is to examine product descriptions to make sure they reconcile accurately with the HS code in that particular country. All countries have a right, all sovereign countries have a right to know what's coming into their country. They have citizens to protect. They are the wall of defense for any products entering into that country. So it is only correct, I think, to assume that countries will adopt the latest technology in order to protect their borders, to make sure that things coming into the country are correct and appropriate and are taxed appropriately. And then finally, here on this is the electronic single windows and the prevalence and the increase of electronic single windows. I remember years ago working for an integrator. Entries were done in multiple systems with multiple agencies. And then when you get the green light, the shipment clears and it goes on into the country and gets delivered. This has all been now incorporated typically into single electronic windows, where these are basically data platforms which allow importers, exporters to interact with just one entry point, submit all the information Brian mentioned earlier on, the importer, the exporter, the address, the consignee name, the product description, the HS code, the value. All of these pieces of information, these vital pieces of information, get entered into an electronic single window, and that window then processes the clearance and then the subsequent movement. If there's any duty to be paid, that will be flagged. So we're seeing the movement of data into these single entry points. So getting your data right up front, which includes the HS code, allows for a smoother clearance and then obviously passage on to the end customer and final delivery. So those are a few trends that we're seeing. And I'm going to move on now to the next slide, which is things to consider and red flags that we know that governments look out for. And our source here is in this case, is the US Census Bureau. So just things you can outsource the process of transportation, of HS classification, of clearance, or final delivery, but you are still responsible. As the exporter of record or the importer of record, you're still responsible. So I just want to give you some red flags that auditors look for in the government. The first here being the company has insufficient internal controls for accurately reporting classifications to customers. To customs. So this would be an example of this. Would be codes which are legacy codes which haven't been reviewed or updated, being attached to shipments and passed through. Repeat offenders, I suppose, the red flags are going to pop up where they see that the incorrect codes have been used, and there's very little internal control within that company for correcting those HS codes. A company doesn't interact with the broker on classification issues. So this would be where you obviously have a broker at a destination country who's performing the clearance for you. If there's no evidence of interaction with that broker and the broker has been left to their own devices to perform the clearance, then that would be perceived as a red flag. And then a few more here as well is relying on one employee. I mentioned this earlier on, handling classification issues with no management supervision. So the task is given to somebody, one individual or a small number of individuals who sit in the office, left to their own devices, not being supervised. That is a red flag. Company import staff who don't have the knowledge, classification requirements, have been put into a job. This is your task. This is what you got to do, but they're not trained. They're not given the correct support. That's another red flag. High turnover of people in key positions is a red flag. Who's supervising the classification activities? Are they appropriately supervised? Those sort of questions come up. So just things to consider. Outsourcing the process is fine, but you do need to take responsibility in making sure that the activity is done up to the standards of the country that you are importing into. I'll pause there, as I believe we have another poll question.
We do. Thank you, Patrick. All right, this is our third poll question for today. True or false question for you all. True or false? My carrier will make sure my codes are accurate prior to shipping overseas. I'll give you all a couple of moments to respond. Okay. Only two options here, so I don't think we need as much time. Couple more moments. Like I said, this is our third poll question. There will be one more. Okay. Correct, everyone. You passed the quiz. Okay. Now I'll pass it over back to Brian and Patrick. Finish this off with some business challenges associated with HS codes.
Okay, so I'll move on. Thank you, Mimi. So business challenges. So here are a few challenges that, when it comes down to the act of HS classification, where we see challenges, where we see difficulty, and where we see errors. So the first one here is the commercial description versus the HS terminology. So there are a lot of examples of where the standard commercial description, something which describes a product that you and I are very familiar with, is not the same as the HS terminology. And you've got to remember, when the WCO produce these HS codes and the descriptions, they've got to be all-encompassing. So they've got to really describe the product as it is, so there's no confusion. So one example of here noted down is baby food. So we all know what baby food is, of course. We're very familiar with it. We see it on the shelves in the supermarket. However, in HS terminology, it's not baby food. It is homogenized composite food preparation. So it's a very, very different. Obviously, it's not something that we would say day to day as we're walking through the supermarket. But it's important to note that there is a difference between the two, and that difference can impact obviously HS classification and the transit of your shipment through customs. Another one is the GRIs and the legal chapter notes. So this is a bit more than 101, of course, but HS codes very often have GRIs and chapter notes attached to them. And what's a GRI? It's a general rule of interpretation. So it's an understanding which has been established over the years that particular product has, and it infers that particular product. And chapter notes are legal challenges where a particular product in a particular country. So let's go back to Fitbit, for example, as that I mentioned earlier on. So perhaps a country had there was a challenge on the Fitbit product to say that it was actually a medical device rather than a wearable tech, and that went through the courts within that country, and it was agreed that it was a medical device, and therefore medical device duties apply to it. That is memorialized in what we call a legal chapter note, which is then attached to that HS code. So there's no, in future, there's no dispute as to how that product has been classified. So just an example there, tomato juice, for instance, into a particular country could be associated with a chapter, which it is in the US, with a chapter 20, note 4, which alludes specifically to the percentage of tomato in the actual tomato juice. Complex items. So we have a lot of customers who don't just import or export individual products, but they import or export what we classify as complex items. And this would be an example, would be a set of products. So if you're buying a kitchen crockery set, you've got plates and saucers, knives, forks, cups, glasses, maybe a tablecloth, all in a set. So that, of course, that set doesn't have a HS code. It has many components within that particular package, which all need classifying individually, because the classification for a stainless steel knife is going to be very different to the classification for a bone china cup, which is going to be very different to a cotton tablecloth. So all those different items in a set will need classifying and listing on your customs entry. Another good example is a watch, a mechanical watch, a traditional watch. That is actually, there's no HS code for a watch. It is actually 3 parts. It is the actual face of the watch, the mechanics of the watch, the strap of the watch, and the battery within it. So 3 parts make up a traditional watch, and those 3 items need to be classified when presenting customs entry. So it's not a straightforward one HS code will do my product. No, because there are complex items, sets, and complicated products which do need multiple HS codes to describe what that actual product is. And then a couple more here. Knowledge management. This is a bit of a challenge. Is that expertise in the domain knowledge, knowing that the things that I've just mentioned there. And then, of course, you've got to train people, got to get them up to speed. You've got to retain them, and turnover is a problem, and there's a cost associated with replacing people and building up that knowledge again within a team. And then the reliance on inappropriate tools. So another problem we see a lot of is HS codes being pulled off a spreadsheet, which has been used in the company for the last 15 years. No one's checked it, no one's updated it. We see that a lot. Or the reliance on one individual who's an expert, who's a guru, but that individual it has vacation, leaves the company, whatever may happen, and that information just sort of disappears overnight. So these are challenges which we see within organizations regularly. Okay, so I just wanted to touch on here the sort of 2 types of business challenge as well. So structural challenges. So as I mentioned earlier on, chapter notes, and the fact that juices are not necessarily considered beverages. This is just an example, but they are considered the preparation of vegetable, fruits, nuts, and seeds. That's a different chapter. So juices are chapter 22 in the HS schedule, whereas the preparation of vegetables, nuts, all dependent upon percentages of the actual vegetable or the fruit in the juice, is in a different chapter altogether, chapter 20. Car seats are not part of the car, but they're considered furniture. So it's not chapter 87, which is a car part. It's actually an article of furniture, which is chapter 94. And electric toothbrushes are not actually toothbrushes, but they are classified as electromechanical domestic appliances, which is, again, a completely different chapter. Different chapter, different HS code, therefore different duty rate. So it's very important to be getting the right. You don't want to be misclassifying it because you're either paying too much or too little. Both are no good. You want to be classifying it correctly, so you're paying the right amount. And then semantic challenges here. And I mentioned a few already. Computers, actually referred to automatic data processing. Baby foods, we talked about that, the homogenized composite food. Wheelchairs, a carriage for disabled people. And blow dryer is electrothermic hair dressing apparatus. Of course, familiar names that we know, but in the HS structure, they're described very differently. Okay, and at this point, I'll pass on to Brian to continue and finish us up on automated solutions for HS codes.
Perfect. Thank you, Patrick. And I'm going to continue some of the complexity that you just touched on. And a lot of the customers on this call, a lot of our customers run into, when does machine learning make sense? When does this additional research and human intervention need to take place? And is it possibly a combination of both? So depending on your unique product, depending on your internal resources, you may want to turn that dial to where complete machine learning may not make sense, and where you may need some human expertise to actually allow that additional research to take place for some of those complex products. So keep that in mind. Everyone talks about AI. Everyone thinks we need to automate. Everyone thinks like AI is going to replace the future. In my opinion, it's not, especially in the HS classification world, because it does not understand some of these complex rules around the World Customs Organization. So think about both points when we're going into identifying these types of products. Now, how does it work? So we want to make sure we automate it to the point where we're not looking at exported Excel files to actually manually look up and research, although we have and we can. We want to automate this process because we have customers sending us millions of unique SKUs that going through one by one may not be the full solution for them. But ultimately automating a portion of it and then allowing some more of those complex products to be manually researched could be a combination of type of a solution. Key point here being, we definitely need good descriptions, good understanding of products, and a real good understanding of what the industry that product is made for. And then that'll give us the good input that we need for the good output that actually will give you the best results for a more accurate and streamlined tariff and duty calculation. So this screen I helped our marketing team create, and I think it's one of my favorites, because this spectrum, we have multiple customers that actually live in either one area of this spectrum or the other, or believe it or not, somewhere in between. And what do I mean by that? If you look to the left, we do have customers that leverage our service for a complete automated AI solution because speed is the key. Accuracy for a $20 item may not be the importance in this specific marketplace world. They need an HS code. They need the speed to market, which is more important than the accuracy. Now, moving over to the accuracy, we have customers that have $500 valued goods, unique products that need additional research. So they leverage that more accurate solution where we have more of a, as Patrick mentioned earlier, a team of 250 plus individuals that's all they do all day. They understand what the World Customs Organization descriptions are, and they do the research and understand the description, so they come back with a more accurate result to where you're getting a 5% tariff or duty added onto a $500 product versus a 30% duty, where either your customer is going to be irate or your carrier is going to bill you that difference, and it taps into your margin. So speed on one side, accuracy on the other, and somewhere in between where we have customers that leverage us for, we want you to go back and look at all of our products as a managed service and possibly automate or a self-serve tool where we can leverage that internal tool for any new products that we have going to the market or any additional countries that we plan on expanding to. We can have our internal team utilize your tool to leverage the detailed descriptions that need to be inputted so they can get the right outcome. So anywhere in between there, depending on the particular needs, we have that variation and that solution depending on where we need to turn that dial. Well, we got a couple minutes left. So I'm going to breeze through this. How does it work? Just as I mentioned, you're going to input that information, whether we leverage an API, FTP. And again, I just did one the other day where someone gave me their Excel file of 10,000 products, and we did it manually through an Excel. Not the best solution, but a solution in the position they were in that we were able to help with. I'm looking at the time here, so I'm speeding up a little. This is a key part. Now, we've done the research, we've done the pre-work, and I talked about carriers because I lived in that world for a while. Here, in my opinion, being in this world for 12, 15 years, moving products, and you'll see that DDP, delivery duties, I say prepaid, because we understand what that HS code is. It gets integrated into your e-com platform. It gets integrated into your ERP. So when someone's doing a live transaction, we see the taxability code, we see the harmonized code, we apply the correct and accurate landed costs. So when your carrier picks that product up, and they're going to pick it up regardless of whether you have an HS code or not, make sure you have it. They pick up, they clear it, they ship overseas. That product does not get delayed because it has a harmonized code. Customs understands what that product is, clears it through customs, hands off to the final mile provider, and that customer has already prepaid duties and taxes accurately at checkout. They receive that product at an accurate landed cost without delays, without any additional fees being assessed at the doorstep. So I've seen a ton of retailers move into this type of solution because of the customer experience. And that customer experience comes with repeat orders. So keep that in mind. We have 4 minutes. I'm going to move it back to Mimi.
Hi, guys. All right, one last poll question before we go into a quick Q&A. Would you like a follow-up from an Avalara sales representative? Yes or no? I'll give you a couple of seconds to respond. Okay. Perfect. Great. All right, like I said, we just have a couple of moments here for a quick, maybe 1 or 2 questions. We have one here from Renee. Do you see software and services needing to be classified with HS codes now or in the future? Patrick, Brian, any thoughts?
Yeah, I can take that one. Go ahead, Patrick. You go first.
Well, yeah. So right now, no. Digital services, software, because there's no physical product. Back in the day, you remember, it was sent around on CDs. That was a physical product. It was a CD, and it had a HS code, and it cleared and it got delivered. But now everything is done digitally, electronically. No, it's not happening right now, and I don't foresee it happening in the future unless Brian's got a crystal ball, which says otherwise.
I do not. But it's a great question, though.
Yeah.
Great. Chris asked while Brian, you were speaking about the our Avalara solution for HS codes and imports. Does this work for importers?
It absolutely does. So we showed a couple slides to where, regardless of whether you're importing into the U.S. or exporting out of the U.S. or from one country to another, harmonized codes are a global solution and a global identifier. So we do have a lot of manufacturers that we don't really need calculations because we only import goods into the U.S. They're the importer of record. And I think Patrick had a slide where, regardless of whether you're importer of record or exporter of record, identifying the goods are your responsibility, and verifying if that tariff is accurate, whether it's coming into the U.S. or exporting out of the U.S., it's just as important.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, so that's all the time we have for today with questions. If there's any that we didn't get to, we'll try to respond to that in an email more directly. We have your questions noted in the back end over here. To finish us out, so if you qualified for CPE credit today, you can download your certificate now in the CPE Certificate Engagement Tool. Your certificate will also be available in a post-event email that you'll receive within the next 24 hours. And in that post-event email, we'll also include a link back to this console to view the webinar on demand You'll also get the slide deck and the additional resources there too. One last friendly reminder that Avalara Crush is happening very soon, I think next week, if my math is correct. It's back this November in Austin, Texas. Our tax compliance conference is designed to help you get the most out of your Avalara solutions, gain insights on industry trends, and to meet your peers. Learn more and register now at avalaracrush.com. I want to give a big thank you to our presenters today. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Patrick. This was wonderful. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.